My name is Trista Littell, and I serve as the Program Coordinator in the Office of Pro-Life Apostolate. As you know, January 22nd, 2020 commemorated the 47th anniversary of the tragic Roe v. Wade decision, U.S. Supreme Court decision whereby abortion was legalized. Over 60 million babies have died, and that many mothers and fathers have suffered. Now, this year is an election year, so some of you are going to be eligible to vote. So I would like to bring to your attention a document from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops entitled Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. In the U.S. Bishop's introductory letter, it states, "The threat of abortion remains our preeminent priority because it directly attacks life itself. It takes place within the sanctuary of the family, and because of the number of lives destroyed, we can't dismiss other serious threats to human life and dignity, such as racism, the environmental crisis, poverty, and the death penalty. Our efforts to protect the unborn remain as important as ever. For just as the Supreme Court may allow greater latitude for state laws restricting abortion, state legislators have passed statutes not only keeping abortion legal through all 9 months of pregnancy, but opening the door to infanticide. It further states that it is essential to affirm the nature of the human person as male and female, to protect the family based on marriage between a man and a woman, and to uphold the rights of children in that regard. We're urged to find ways to care better for God's creation and to protect our common home. We must resist our throwaway culture and seek integral development for all. With these and other serious challenges facing our nation and our church, we're called to walk with those who suffer and to work towards justice and healing." It further states the need for greater assistance for those who are sick and dying. The end of life is a holy moment, a moment that marks preparation for life with God, and it is to be treated with reverence and accompaniment so people don't seek out euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide. The end of life is as sacred as the beginning of life, and it requires treatment that honors the true dignity of the human person as created in the image and likeness of God. For those involved in human trafficking, we must pray for the victims, but also for the conversion of the buyers and the traffickers. For those who have suffered the wounds of abortion, we must be the face of God's love, mercy, and reconciliation. Where we live, work, and worship, we strive to understand before seeking to be understood and to treat everyone with respect. In this coming year and beyond, we are urged to respond in prayer and action to the call of faithful citizenship. And in doing so, we live out the call to holiness and work with Christ as he builds his kingdom of love. We are so blessed to have 9 contestants from various schools here tonight, and we are going to go in alphabetical order. Each of you, when you entered, you had the criteria of what it was going to be. We ask that you keep your speeches from 5 to 7 minutes. No props allowed, but if you need to read and have your notes, that's absolutely fine. Without any further ado, if Jamie Adams could please come forward.
Imagine you are sick and you apply for a medical procedure to help you. Your request is rejected. Instead, you were told you were eligible for euthanasia. Sounds unreal, like something that can't happen anywhere, much less in our own country? Unfortunately, this very situation has been documented several times in Oregon. So what exactly is euthanasia? Euthanasia is said to be the painless killing of a patient who is suffering from an incurable disease or assisted suicide. This definition makes euthanasia sound moral, but it isn't. Euthanasia is illegal in most countries, but it still happens. Active euthanasia, which is when someone is killed through a deliberate act, such as an overdose of medicine, is illegal in most countries, including most of the US. However, passive euthanasia, which is when someone is killed by not doing anything to stop it, such as restricting food and water from someone who is in a comatose state, is legal in many more countries, including the US, the UK, and Mexico. This is a tragedy that needs to stop. One role of the government is to help and protect their people. Euthanasia is a contradiction of this. Most people around the world are against euthanasia, and yet it is still rampant around the world and becoming increasingly more common. There are many reasons why euthanasia is wrong. The first is that it is a form of elder abuse. Holland wants to make it legal to allow euthanasia for patients who suffer from dementia without their verbal consent. This is not only wrong, it's also murder. Even when consent is given, it is often because the elderly patient is made to feel that their continued existence is a burden. Who wants to feel like they are a burden to their friends and family? This is psychological abuse. Statistics show that since euthanasia has become legal in Oregon, many people have chosen assisted dying because they are worried about being a financial strain on their friends and family. There is a lack of dignity that comes with euthanasia. Patients may choose euthanasia because they are made to feel that they are better off dead. Instead of offering the option of euthanasia, we should show compassion for our elderly and make them feel cherished until their natural deaths. Did you know that 78% of euthanasia cases in Belgium weren't even discussed with the patient? This means that they weren't even given the opportunity to give consent. In 2013, the World Medical Association stated that they were against euthanasia. If the biggest medical association in the world is against euthanasia, then why is it still legal and common? Many argue that euthanasia should be legal to release a person who is in extreme pain. However, modern medicine has made it able to relieve most people of physical pain. Others believe that euthanasia is right and should be legal everywhere because it is considered mercy killing. However, this is a very misleading term. Euthanasia is essentially the intentional killing of an innocent person, which is considered an intrinsically evil act. No matter what the intentions may be, euthanasia is still wrong. Many people believe that we have a right to die. However, a right is a moral claim, and we have no claim on death. Others compare the right to death with the right to life. We have a right to life because we were given it at natural conception. However, saying that we have a right to death implies that we own it, and life is something we can discard when we no longer have a use for it. Death is not something we own. It is something we all have to go through but have no control over. In today's world, there is a lack of respect for life. Life is a gift, and we should do what we can to preserve it into natural death. We are living in a culture of death, and we should make it into a culture of life. One argument pro-euthanasianists use is that the patient can die peacefully and without pain. However, it is reported that many people who are euthanized experience spasms associated with extreme pain. Also, consider the psychological pain one goes through when they have to choose death so as not to be a financial or physical burden on their loved ones. We need to defend life at all stages. Assisted suicide is a big part of euthanasia. Statistics show that the number of assisted suicides have more than quadrupled in Switzerland in the last decade. These numbers have also more than tripled in the Netherlands since 2003, and in the US, since some states have allowed euthanasia, rates for suicide have gone up 6.3%. Euthanasia is also wrong morally. Pope Pius XII condemned euthanasia programs by the Nazis. He was the first to explicitly address the issue and to offer guidance. Later, in 1980, the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith released its declaration on euthanasia. This helped to dive deeper into what Pope Pius XII was trying to teach. Pope Pius XII cautioned the people of the Church about the alarming symptoms of death, which sees the growing number of elderly and disabled people as intolerable and too burdensome. The Catechism helps to further explain the Church's views on euthanasia. To be clear, the Church does not teach that life must be prolonged artificially just for the sake of prolonging it. According to Catholic Straight Answers, what is the Church's euthanasia? Euthanasia must be distinguished from the extraordinary means of healthcare. That is, the euthanasia must, or the guardian of an unconscious patient has the right to reject outright or discontinue procedures that do not offer a proportionate good, do not offer reasonable hope of benefit, or impose excessive burdens on the patient or his or her family. In other words, if the prognosis is that the disease or condition is incurable, the patient and his or her family has the right to reject outright or discontinue procedures the patient can decide to let death happen naturally without the intervention of extreme measures to keep him or her alive longer than they would normally stay that way. This is not, however, actively killing someone. Once again, we have to fight for life and to change this culture of death into a culture of life. We need to help those who are suffering and not make them feel like they are a burden or not worth our love. Instead of ending someone's life, we should turn to modern medicine to relieve their pain. Life is a basic right, and we should be allowed to act on it from the womb to the tomb. We need to make respect for life a priority. If we don't, every life is at stake.
Our next contestant is Haley Bordelon.
Growing up, I was friends with a boy named Travis. Travis was raised in a Catholic home and was brought to church almost every weekend. Travis gave high fives and smiles to everyone in the hallway as he passed. Travis participated in his school's production of Annie. Travis graduated from Our Lady of Fatima and went on to be a student at St. Thomas More. Travis held a job. Travis graduated from STM and is now a student at the University of Louisiana. Travis has Down syndrome. I first met Travis when I was in 5th grade at Our Lady of Fatima. Travis, despite his disability, continued to grow and prosper, not only as a student, but as an individual. Thanks to Fatima's Department of Exceptional Children, I had the ability to be surrounded by children just like Travis every day. By spending time with them in the cafeteria, classroom, and playground, I saw just how much potential these children had. However, I soon learned that not everyone had the same opinion when it came to disabled children. As I learned more about the pro-life movement, I became aware that many people wrongfully believe in the idea of disability-selective abortion. So today, let's first look at what disability-selective abortion is, then understand why it happens so much in today's society, before finally looking at the Church's stance and understanding the moral repercussions that come with an idea such as disability-selective abortion. According to an article published by the University of Notre Dame, disability-selective abortion is the termination of a pregnancy that follows a diagnosis of an anomaly prior to birth. The article goes on to say that this type of abortion can be caused by a disability as small as having an extra finger. It's estimated that about 3% of all abortions annually are attributed to disability-selective abortion. According to the World Health Organization's latest statistics on abortion, as of February 9th of 2020, over 4 million abortions have taken place across the world, meaning that 138,726 disability-selective abortions have taken place since January 1st. Those most at risk for this type of abortion are fetuses with chromosomal disorders, such as Down syndrome. Out of all Down syndrome pregnancies, about 90% end in abortion. A geneticist in Iceland told a CBS reporter that they have almost completely eliminated Down syndrome from their society. So, why are so many pregnancies in which the mother is carrying a baby with an abnormality ending in abortion? Well, when a parent discovers that their unborn child is suffering from a disability, they're told by doctors and society that they have a very important decision to make. According to an article published by The Guardian, one set of parents decided to abort their baby with Down syndrome because they realized that the world is a difficult place for people with intellectual disabilities. Slate.com says that the problem is rarely ever the fact that abortion is available to parents. The bigger problem lies in how little information they receive and how grim medical professionals make their diagnosis seem. Many parents have reported feelings of being pressured into having an abortion after a negative prenatal diagnosis. And when they decline having an abortion, they feel judged. Slate.com continues to tell the story of Yemi Johnson and her negative diagnosis. A doctor sat down with her and her husband, asked how many children they had already, and then, referring to their disabled unborn child, asked, "Is that the legacy you want to leave your children?" People are feeling pressured to terminate their negative diagnosis pregnancies from not only the world around them, but the doctors that they rely on for advice and guidance to make the best decisions. So, now that we know why so many disability-selective abortions are happening across the world, we can look at what the Church says and the moral repercussions from disability-selective abortion. In May of 2019, Pope Francis stated, "Human life is sacred and inviolable, and the use of prenatal diagnosis for selective purposes must be strongly discouraged because it is the expression of inhuman eugenics mentality, which removes the possibility for families to accept, embrace, and love their weakest children." By saying this, Pope Francis is saying that abortion is never the answer to a negative diagnosis, mainly because it is being used as a way to prevent disabilities, instead of loving and embracing them. FeministForLife.org asks the question that begs to be asked. If actual or potential disability is a reason to devalue children before birth, what a cruel message does this send to persons with disabilities who are already born? By aborting those with disabilities, we are not only saying that they have no potential to grow and create happiness, but we're telling those who are already born with these disabilities that they should have never been born in the first place. When we come up with new improvements for life, we must think of everyone before them that have happily lived with the same exact challenges. Travis is out there living his best life. Every accomplishment that I listed earlier could have never happened if his parents didn't believe. His parents saw the potential in him before he was even born. If his parents can do it, we can. His parents saw the potential in him. Now we just need the rest of the world to. Thank you.
Our next contestant is Christine Doré.
Sitting in a quiet bathroom, she waited alone. She waited with anticipation while at the same time holding her breath and the white plastic stick. Will today be like all the other days of the past 12 years? Or will the bright blue cross sign appear today? The long-anticipated news finally arrived as the blue ink lit up in the sign of a cross. It was positive. After 12 years of marriage, a miracle baby was finally conceived. The excitement for their precious baby grew with each passing day. The future was bright. 6 weeks after that glorious blue cross sign appeared, that bright future came to an abrupt halt. Darkness surrounded the couple as they waited for the doctor. The neurologist walked in and apologized for the news he was about to deliver. As the gray-haired man shifted on his feet and gazed down at the floor, he announced that the MRI revealed a brain tumor. Then he said in a whisper, "This type of tumor does not need to be biopsied." No biopsy sounded great to the mother, but he kept explaining, "The tumor is so deep inside of her brain that a biopsy was not recommended, as the procedure would leave her without the ability to speak or understand language, and it would risk the life of the baby." Then he continued, "There's also no need because it is a classic MRI for glioma. It's untreatable because of its location. There's nothing that we can do." The couple was numb, as the doctor explained how quickly the tumor would grow and that MRIs would need to be done every 4 to 6 weeks to track the growth. The husband quietly asked about her prognosis. Darkness enveloped them, as the doctor responded, 18 weeks is my best estimate. 18 weeks. Sitting on the examination table in her patient gown, the cold room felt small. Her husband stood by her side as she shifted nervously, making the paper that was stuck to her legs crackle. The OBGYN arrived to check on the health of the baby. Or so they thought. Before he entered the room, he'd already been briefed by the neurologist about the brain tumor. He introduced himself and got straight to the business at hand. "I think you should have an abortion." The parents looked at him with shock and disbelief. An abortion could possibly give you more time. The hormones in pregnancy often make cancer grow more rapidly. In unified shock, they replied, "No." The doctor shook his head, and he continued, "I am your doctor. I'm not that baby's doctor. It's in your best interest to terminate this pregnancy." According to a study done by Airtasker, 91.9% of respondents said that they had trust in doctors. In this survey, physicians outrank 6 other professions, including IT workers. In another study, a Gallup poll in 2018 found that medical professionals are the most trusted profession. Pew Research Center also found that public confidence in scientists exceeds the confidence in other groups and institutions, including the media, business leaders, and elected officials. Even though making abortion illegal would obviously save many lives, it will not change the mindset of the people who do not believe in the culture of life. One issue is found in the hands of the doctors. These men and women are constantly given advice to their patients. These trained professionals have seen evidence of the existence of life from its beginning. They have been tested and studied and witnessed it firsthand. People in other professional fields don't get the same experience, and this leads people to trust medical doctors with their own lives. Former abortionist Dr. David Brewer witnessed his first abortion when he was in medical school. He was asked to see if all the pieces were there. He stated, "I thought it would be an exciting hands-on experience, looking at tissue. I opened the sack up and put it on the towel, and there were parts of a person in there. I knew what I was looking at. I had taken anatomy. There was a little scapula and an arm. I saw some ribs and a chest and a tiny head, and I saw a piece of a leg and a tiny hand. And I turned and said, 'I guess you got it all.'" Ladies and gentlemen, the story about the pregnant mother with the untreatable brain tumor is my story. I am the baby that the doctor thought was not worth saving. My parents were my voice. How many parents would feel helpless and think that the doctor is the ultimate authority? How many parents would have listened to his advice, not feeling like they had any other option? That baby is standing in front of you today, talking about the importance of all the other lives who cannot speak for themselves. That baby's parents are in this audience. My mother is beautiful and healthy. My mother survived the untreatable. Her brain tumor has not even grown a fraction of a millimeter in almost 19 years. One possible solution could bring the culture of life to medical professionals, especially the OBs. They, in turn, could guide others in this same direction. There are many women's clinics and resources throughout our community. With the implied authority and trustworthiness of doctors, they can become the voices for the unborn. Each community could gather a list of businesses and resources for these women. This list could be delivered to the doctors in the area so that they can offer options to struggling mothers. I was blessed that my parents were not swayed by the doctor's advice. They were my voice. Together we can grow a culture of life and become a unified voice for the unborn. The Lord called me from the womb, formed me from the womb to be his servant. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 1 through 5. Thank you.
Our next contestant is Isaac Friedel.
Since the beginning of mankind, humans have continually progressed in the natural world. From man's discovery of fire to Galileo Galilei telling all of the world that the earth is actually round, and even now, when surgeons are able to operate on a beating heart, science has continually become more advanced. In the past 20 years, the world has seen what we call one of the most full of advancement periods that the natural world has ever seen. What do we mean by this? Well, the advancements in science in the past 20 years have never been seen before. One of the most interesting things that man has discovered is the use of stem cells, and most importantly, embryonic stem cell research. Embryonic stem cells are defined by Oxford Dictionary as cells that are found within the blastocyst of a 4 to 5 day old embryo. Stem cell research nowadays is very popular. However, upon further analysis, we find that embryonic stem cell research is not really something that we want to get our hands into. First, we find that embryonic stem cell research devalues life. Second, we find that this kind of stem cell research only perpetuates the already existent problem of in vitro fertilization. And third, we look to how literally history is now repeating itself. So on to our first point. Embryonic stem cell research devalues life. Within the grasp of embryonic stem cell research, we find that in order to extract the cells from the 4 to 5 day old embryo, scientists must terminate the life of that embryo. So we see right off the bat that embryonic stem cell research ends a life. And it not only ends a human life, it ends an innocent human life. So we see for one fundamental reason that this sort of research is wrong. But also we see that it devalues life further. Many supporters of embryonic stem cell research argue that because these embryos are not viable outside of the womb, in other words, they would need extraordinary means to survive, their life is less valuable than, let's say, the average teenager. However, let's put this into a different situation. Embryonic stem cell research is almost exactly like someone on dialysis. Someone on dialysis is reliant on a machine to survive. They're not viable without this machine. However, is their life any less valuable than the average teenager? Well, many people would say no. However, supporters of embryonic stem cell research claim otherwise. They say that because life is not viable outside of the womb, it is not as valuable. And like I said before, this is the major reason that embryonic stem cell research is bad. It simply says that some people's lives are less valuable than others. But we know that because of our own human dignity that is common to every single person, this is simply untrue. So this is one reason why embryonic stem cell research must come to an end. But there are a few others. Embryonic stem cell research also perpetuates the already existent problem of in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization, otherwise known as IVF, is a form of infertility treatment in which sperm and egg are united outside of the womb in a petri dish and then planted inside the uterus in hopes that the now fertilized egg will implant onto the uterine wall. Many couples who find that they are unable to conceive a child have resorted to this process. However, many embryos that are created outside of the womb do not implant and die inside of the womb. Additionally, also many times doctors will fertilize many eggs at one time and freeze them so that if the first egg does not implant, they already have a fertilized one to implant in its place. So what happens when a couple finally does become pregnant and there are leftover eggs? Well, it is most common for couples to freeze their eggs and forget about them. In Australia alone, The Economist reports that over 70,000 frozen embryos are found in fertility treatment centers. So why exactly is this a problem? Well, as I've stated before, many of these embryos are forgotten. These lives are no longer remembered. But also, it perpetuates the problem of embryonic stem cell research because scientists are now encouraging parents of these frozen embryos to donate their eggs to science in hopes that the stem cells from these embryos might be extracted. So why exactly is IVF wrong in the first place? Well, first of all, as I've already stated before, it has a high mortality rate. It usually takes many tries in order to get a fertilized egg to implant inside of the uterus. But also, it's becoming more and more common for doctors to implant numerous eggs at one time into the uterus in hopes that at least one will implant. But in some circumstances, more than one do. And now we see that a woman might be pregnant with twins or even triplets. So what happens when a couple doesn't want twins or doesn't want triplets? Well, the last resort is abortion. And we have already seen by many of the contestants here today that abortion is fundamentally wrong. It takes the life of an innocent human baby. So we see that in vitro fertilization is only perpetuated by stem cell research. Stem cell research can't happen without IVF, and the way that these scientists get their hands on embryos is through IVF. So if we end in vitro fertilization, we will end embryonic stem cell research. And we've already explained why that is wrong. But the third reason why embryonic stem cell research is so bad is because it is literally history in repeat. In Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s, Joseph Mengele, a popular doctor who worked for Adolf Hitler, experimented on many sets of identical twins in concentration camps. And because of his brutal and cruel handling of these children, many of his patients did not survive. He believed that somehow he could advance science through these experiments, that somehow within his labs, new things, new facts, and new ways of discovering science might be discovered. However, nowadays we look back on the history that occurred in Germany and think of how cruel and horrible and utterly disturbing it actually is. that an innocent human life might be taken in the name of science. But ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what is happening today. The life of an innocent human being in its early stages of an embryo is taken for the sake of science. So what are we going to do? Well, we can look to alternatives to embryonic stem cell research. The Economist also reports that embryonic stem cell research is actually not that needed. In fact, adult stem cells from sources like the blood of an umbilical cord actually have more stem cells than an embryo. So the fact that we are having to terminate the life of an embryo to extract stem cells is actually bogus. We don't need to do this. We can find it in already present forms, and we can find it without having to take the life of an innocent human being. So ladies and gentlemen, as pro-lifers, it is our duty to protect human dignity. It is our duty to protect human life. And embryonic stem cell research detracts from that dignity. And it is because of this that we must end embryonic stem cell research. Thank you.
Our next contestant is Annie Huckabee.
Something is not a right unless it is extended to everyone. And whenever you pull away all of the emotions and the ethos of pro-life and pro-choice arguments, the woman's right to her body and her own autonomy versus an unborn child's right to life is what it typically comes down to. And what I would like to offer to this dichotomy is that a woman's right to empowerment and her autonomy cannot come at the cost of taking the power away from others. And we know that from 1973 until 2017, 61,628,584 children had this right taken away from them. That is 18% of all pregnancies in 2017, according to the Gutschmer Institute. And yet, I still hear repeated, my body, my choice, whenever there are now two bodies involved. If a pregnant woman's body could only be explained as hers, then she would have 2 hearts, 20 fingers, and 4 eyes. And even though that body within her is completely dependent upon her, so is that body once it's born, legally for 18 years. Even the United States court system recognizes an unborn child as a child, in that if a woman that's pregnant is murdered, it's considered a double homicide. Even greater is my fear that her body, her choice, is what it becomes whenever, that my body, my choice becomes her body, her choice. And because of this, her problem. 75% of women that are forced into the choice of abortion are at poverty line or below. And 61% of these women are African American, who make less than white women do. It is our job as a society and as a community to ensure that mothers have the care that they need at all stages of life. And within our own community of Louisiana, 8,097 lives were taken in 1 year alone, according to the most recent data from Pro-Life. Underlying the problem of abortion is a much greater one, and that is that abortion is contributing to women's suffering rather than helping relieve it. We live in a society that is not only anti-child, but anti-woman. And if you're a woman that wants to have a child, it's even less kind to you, especially professionally. My math teacher was balancing a full-time teaching career as well as going to grad school by night. And she was given a single day off whenever she was giving birth. And her professor said that every day that she missed after that, a letter grade would drop. Women are often forced to choose career over family. And abortion's accessibility empowers corporations to take advantage of these 10-minute procedures with years of trauma involved. Banning abortion, though necessary, is not the only change that we need to see in order to protect our families and thus our world. Because wherever you go in life, there's only one option. There's something wherever you go in a country that is
pro-life. Because whenever you live in a country that says life is an option, there is something fundamentally pro-death and skewed about it. The solution is that we care for one another and help the least among us, the impoverished and struggling, the born and the unborn. Women's reproductive rights should not be the right to end life, but rather the right to maternity leave and making sure that they have what they need to ensure that this child gets the best that this world can offer it to them. So that rather than producing a world that is polluted with hatred and suffering, we can create one that is full of love and a culture of life instead of one of death. Thank you.
Our next contestant is Catherine or Kate Hughes.
Every girl at some point in her life dreams of being married to the perfect man and having their own beautiful children. Now imagine growing up from that girl into a woman, only to find out that you are infertile, unable to procreate with your husband. Having your own children is something that is difficult for you to give up. Discerning between adoption and IVF, the doctors provide information about in vitro fertilization because carrying your own children seems more appealing. After multiple visits to the specialist doctor, the implantation of the fertilized eggs finally occurs. In the same visit, you and your husband also decide to freeze the remaining embryos for fear that you two may desire more children in the future. Years and years pass by until you finally decide to donate the frozen embryos to science. This is just one of the examples of the many ways that embryos are denied dignity and that they are not given a single shot at life. In the given scenario, there are various contradictions to our Catholic faith. This woman is reasonably worried about her family's future, but she is called to trust God in her fear and anxiety. Sorry, 1 second. I feel that in choosing to go through with IVF and creating a child, the couple, without truly realizing, chose to play God rather than respect and have faith in the one true God, along with his prosperous plans for them. In the book of Job, we learned to trust the Lord with all of our hearts and lean not on our own understanding. In all of our ways submit to him, and he will make our path straight. Although it is very difficult to see through the eyes of this world, the one that idolizes the perfect family or a flawless life, but we must realize that suffering is made to be a blessing. For it is through suffering that God allows us to be closest to him. Placing our burdens and concerns into his almighty hands is a remarkably beautiful way to show God his goodness and mercy are appreciated in both the good and bad times. The Lord never fails to provide for us all that we truly need. We need only realize the difference between our wants and our needs. What about those leftover frozen embryos? Because these embryos were discarded by the couple, that does not make it morally acceptable to violate and destroy them. An embryo's otherwise going to waste, nor the fact that it is trapped in deep freeze, does not waver the moral analysis of what can be done to these human beings. Through research, I came across a hypothetical situation that I believe clearly explains what is happening to these forgotten embryos. Think about coal miners who are permanently trapped deep inside the earth, through no fault of their own, with the certainty that they are all going to die anyway. Would it make it okay to send a remote control robotic device to forcibly harvest their organs from the miners and cause their death for the benefit of other suffering individuals who may benefit from transplants? The beginning of human life is such a controversy, but it is a biological fact that it begins at the moment of conception. As Catholics, we are provided with further information and biblical proof of this truth. From the book of Jeremiah we read, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I dedicated you." God loves and claims every single life that is created, whether naturally or artificially. We must work to create a safe world where all people may come to know and love God, themselves, and one another. Stem cells have the potential to develop into nearly every different type of cell in the body. For this reason, researchers and doctors seek them for their essential and transformative potential in the medical science world. Embryonic stem cell research, a branch of this new technology, is a scientific practice of using stem cells from embryos that have been developed from eggs in vitro for improvement in efficient experimentation. Embryonic stem cells are typically easier to obtain because the cells are gathered from living specimens that cannot yet physically speak for themselves. Although this newly found resource may sound like a scientific breakthrough, using embryonic stem cells to cure various diseases and perform transplants have not been proven successful. The countless stories of survival patients have only been cured using adult stem cells. Adult stem cells can be gathered from the brain, bone marrow, blood vessels, skeletal muscles, skin, teeth, the heart, and the list goes on. It is a more safe and a more morally sound option, and for this reason, adult stem cell research is supported by the Catholic Church. Adult stem cells should be resorted to over embryonic stem cell research in order to uphold the dignity of all persons, no matter how small. I'll leave you with this quote by a true pro-life advocate, Saint Mother Teresa. "Your true character is most accurately measured by how you treat those who can do nothing for you." Thank you.
Our next contestant is Ava Lejeune.
There is no limit to what we as women can accomplish. Michelle Obama. Though this sounds like empowerment, the feminist movement often misses the mark on what true empowerment and feminism looks like, especially in the cases and the tragedy of abortion. The feminist movement has been around for some time, but it continues to change its dynamics to fit the oppression that arises against women. The current most prevalent issues that the movement fights for is bodily autonomy and an end for sex trafficking. However, the abortion industry does nothing to provide for the true freedom of women and perpetuates the tragedy of sex trafficking, directly attacking women. Firstly, the legalization of abortion was only made available through the oppression of a woman. Secondly, Planned Parenthood, the so-called women's advocate, does nothing to truly uphold the dignity and protection of women. And finally, truly caring about what it means to be a woman means accepting motherhood. Firstly, let's go to the very roots of abortion, where a woman has always been oppressed. According to Politico, on January 12, 2019, Norma McCorvey, a 22-year-old woman, found herself pregnant in unpromising circumstances for the third time. She went through with her previous 2 pregnancies, but she placed both up for adoption. This time, McCorvey went to her adoption attorney, Henry McCluskey, looking for a similar situation. However, Henry quickly referred her to 2 lawyers who were waiting to challenge Texas law to legalize abortion, and found McCorvey to be the perfect candidate. She was young, she was poor, and she was white. Norma's case was fully taken into the hands of her lawyers. She was not informed on what her own case would entail. Rather, she was told that an abortion just dealt with a piece of tissue, and that it was like passing a heavy period rather than the termination of a distinct, living, and whole human person. Her 2 attorneys, Wedding and Coffey, never wished to provide for the needs of the woman in front of them. Rather, they promised her money and the pseudonym Jane Roe for protection, but her lawyers never actually intended to protect her. Roe only met with the attorneys twice. Together, the lawyers drafted a 1-page affidavit, which Roe signed but did not read. She would not be called to testify and attended none of the trial. She found out about the Supreme Court ruling from the newspaper on January 23, 1973. Roe's attorneys never talked to her again. They needed the story and the consent, which Roe gave them, but she never was informed on other options. She was told that an abortion would be quicker and easier than adoption. But Roe never had an abortion. The case was not passed until much after the birth of her third child, whom she ended up giving up for adoption. Roe's third child was not conceived in rape. Neither were her previous two, a myth that many ill-informed advocates proclaim. Roe's story is one of silence and oppression, something that the feminist movement claims to mitigate. Hillary Clinton even says, "Too many women in too many countries speak the same language, the language of silence." Contrary to this statement, Roe was silenced from the very beginning. She was left alone, cold, and ultimately empty. Her voice was not heard, and her options were not given. Roe v. Wade was born out of deception and oppression. So why do we call it the case for the woman when it clearly was never for women? Aside from the history, abortion tells a woman that the only way she can be good enough, powerful enough, and successful enough is by killing the child in her womb. Though Michelle Obama said women can accomplish anything, she leaves out the very gift of motherhood, the very thing that abortion attacks. But let's move on to Planned Parenthood, the so-called organization that helps promote women's dignity and protection. However, when we fully look at Planned Parenthood and its own statistics, we see that Planned Parenthood does nothing to provide for the dignity and protection of women. Rather, it only perpetuates the problem. It is a business, with its best seller being abortion. Though Planned Parenthood claims to support women's health, its own numbers prove otherwise. Mammograms aren't even offered, and it performs less than 2% of all women's cancer screenings in the United States, though it commits over 30% of America's abortions. Also, Planned Parenthood does nothing to end sex trafficking. It only perpetuates the problem. According to Live Action, Planned Parenthood allows and often encourages underage girls to lie about their age, claiming they want as little information as possible. Many sex traffickers take their very own victims to the clinic and are asked little to no questions. Planned Parenthood does nothing to report any instances that seem skeptical, and the only information that we actually have about sex trafficking victims being ignored is through Live Action, a media outlet that sends spies undercover. Aside from Planned Parenthood never supporting women, we also see that Planned Parenthood was born out of racism. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, had one goal in mind: targeting minorities. She set up her facilities in low-income areas, directly targeting African American women. Alveda King, the niece of Martin Luther King Jr., claims that Planned Parenthood and abortion are the biggest racist drivers of the 21st century. Killing, according to the United Center for Disease Control and Prevention Abortion Surveillance Report, 35% of abortions in the United States are performed on African American women, who make up only 12% of the United States population. But if Planned Parenthood isn't enough to see that women's issues are not solved through abortion, let's go to the point that proves that motherhood is the ultimate point where women can flourish and truly exemplify their gifts. We'll take the example of Chiara Corbella Petrillo. Many of you may know about her, but she recently died in 2012, and she's becoming a canonized saint. Currently, she's a servant of God. And she had 3 separate pregnancies, all of which she was encouraged to end with abortion. She chose otherwise for all 3 of her pregnancies, and she is considered one of the most joyful persons or female saints that we are soon going to receive, hopefully. But through denying that abortion was her only option, she was fully able to flourish and accept motherhood as a gift that fully empowered her, contrary to that of abortion in the Planned Parenthood industry. Thank you.
Our next contestant is Liliana Pagan.
Since the beginning of human history, man has always found some way to discriminate and dehumanize a certain group of people, usually the minority. We see this in slavery, and we saw it in the Holocaust, and now, like Isaac said, history is repeating itself with abortion. Why have we come to a place where it is just to kill an innocent life inside the womb? In order to answer that question, we have to look at three main ideas. First, we have to look at the corrupt legislation within the decision of the Roe v. Wade. Secondly, we have to look at the arguments against abortion and why it's so wrong. And thirdly, we have to look at the impact that Roe v. Wade has made on America in the past 40 plus years. So firstly, the decision of Roe v. Wade, where did that come from? What was decided and why did they decide it? It all began when a young woman found out that she was pregnant at age 22. She was neither mentally stable nor financially stable, and she knew that she wasn't going to be able to raise this child. So after consulting with her adoption advisor, that advisor pointed her to two lawyers who were waiting for the perfect opportunity to open up a case to make abortion legal in Texas. Now, these two lawyers manipulated this young woman into thinking that abortion was her only option. And then from that moment, she became known as Jane Roe, the banner and face of abortion. Now, the legislation itself, we can see there are many holes within that the legislation. First, the legislation was based solely on an interpretation of the 14th Amendment that said that they interpreted to saying that women had the right to privacy of their own body. However, they failed to look at what is clearly stated in the Constitution, the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Now, the Roe v. Wade decision was also based on the fact that they could not scientifically prove that a fetus was a human person. However, with advancement in technology, we know that's not true. And lastly, the legislation legalized abortion for women so long as the woman's health was in jeopardy because of that pregnancy. However, they defined health as being a woman's physical health, mental health, and even financial health. This basically gives a woman any excuse to have an abortion. Now, we see that there are many issues within that legislation, but what makes abortion so wrong? This brings me to my next point. In the past, many pro-choicers like to argue that the fetus is not a human person. However, like I've previously stated, with the advancement of biology, embryonic studies, and just with the rise of technology, we know that a human person can be defined as something alive, distinct, and human. Now, the fetus, from the moment of conception, perfectly fits into this definition. So we know that the fetus is a human person from the beginning of life, and we know that it is not we know that the embryo is a person from the moment of conception. However, pro-choicers are coming up with this new argument that the woman still has a right to terminate her pregnancy. What philosophers have begun to argue is what I'm going to call, for simplicity, the kidney disease transplant argument. Basically, what people like to argue is they put you in a situation where, let's say you have a child, and that child has a kidney disease, and the child's going to die if they don't get a kidney transplant, and you just happen to be the only person in the world who can donate their kidney to save that child's life. By donating your kidney, you will save the child's life, and you won't even harm your life because you have two kidneys. The philosopher says that he likes to argue that a woman is not morally obliged to donate their kidney. And we agree with this. Even the Catholic Church says that no person should be forced to donate a part of their body without their consent. However, the philosopher likes to argue that if a woman is not morally obliged to donate their kidney to that child, then a woman should not be morally obliged to donate their uterus to the child. However, that this argument completely shatters when we look at the purpose and nature of the kidney and the purpose and nature of the uterus. The purpose and nature of the kidney is solely for the woman's health, for that woman's body. But the uterus was made for something completely different. The uterus was made solely for that child. That means that that child has more right to the uterus than the woman does. Therefore, the woman is morally obliged to carry out that pregnancy. Overall, there is no just reason why the pregnancy should be terminated, and it should not be just in America. Now that we know what was so wrong within the legislation, what makes abortion so evil, we have to look at the impact that abortion has made on America since the decision of Roe v. Wade. First, we have to look on the impact of the women. Studies were shown that 1/3 of women were more likely to suffer depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and PTSD after having an abortion. Now, abortion and places such as Planned Parenthood like to, I guess, promote this idea of feminism, how abortion is empowering women. But what kind of empowerment? It gives a woman this pain that lasts out throughout years. It doesn't just hurt the baby and it doesn't just hurt the woman. It also hurts all of us. Like I said, like we've all agreed, 60 million lives have been lost to abortion since 1973. That means that 1/3 of my generation is missing. 1/3 of my friends are not here. 1/3 of my students, my peers, are gone. Abortion doesn't just affect the woman. It doesn't just affect the child. It affects me and you and you and you. It affects all of us. Martin Luther King was the antidote to slavery. St. John Paul the Great was the antidote to the Holocaust. Who will be the antidote to the abortion? Who will stand up for the most innocent lives who are on this planet? Who will stand up and be the voice for the voiceless? Thank you.
Our final contestant is Madeline Romero.
Throughout America's 47-year history with legalized abortion, over 60 million lives have been taken. That equals to about 1/3 of my generation. But what exactly is this thing that is tearing apart the very fibers of our country? With so many pro-abortion advocates claiming that abortion is health care and that women cannot be truly free without it, I believe that it is important to explain the brutality and tragedy that is abortion. Because truth be told, abortion harms not only the unborn, but also the mother. As a nation, we must overcome this issue in which tears apart our families and lives. Rehumanizing the unborn, educating others on what abortion truly does, and helping those in crisis pregnancies are vital steps in fostering a culture of life, and in return will help us reach our goal, making abortion illegal and unthinkable. I believe that within my lifetime, we will be able to overturn the notorious Roe v. Wade, in which made abortion legal, and begin pulling back together our country. Prior to speaking the barbarity of abortion, it must be established that the unborn are in fact dehumanized by the media and by pro-choicers. Phrases such as termination of pregnancy, clump of cells, and even fetus are used by those who support abortion in order to validate their viewpoint and shift the narrative. Because if we're being truly honest, who would want to knowingly support the murder of an innocent human life? Thus, this sterile terminology aids in gaining supporters of abortion. However, any basic biology class teaches its students that a unique, whole, living human life begins at conception. This is a human, not merely a pregnancy or blob of tissues. This brings me to my next point, what an abortion is. An abortion is defined by Merriam-Webster as the termination of pregnancy after, accompanied by, resulting in, or closely followed by the death of an embryo or fetus. Though many people are uninformed as to what actually occurs during this termination of pregnancy. The less gruesome way to describe this procedure is still arguably one of the most heartbreaking acts of brutality to a human life. The vulgar and unfiltered truth of the methods used to kill the child vary. For example, in a second trimester surgical abortion, might I add that the child is 15 to 24 weeks by this point. The fetus is robbed of their vital, life-sustaining amniotic fluid and then torn apart limb by an abortionist. Another type of abortion, possibly the most horrific kind, are heart attack abortions. These are usually performed when the child is 25 to 40 weeks old and have a high chance of viability outside of the womb. In this type of abortion, digoxin is inserted into the fetus and induces cardiac arrest. The mother is, by this point in the child's life, they can feel pain. The mother then is left to deliver her dead child, sometimes alone and without proper medical care. The argument that abortion is health care stands pale in comparison to the actual deed that is carried out, the vicious homicide of another human life. Murder is not health care, nor will it ever be. Arguments brought up by those who want abortion to stay legalized include that it is necessary to have abortion because it would hurt pregnant women in need if it was outlawed. But St. Ambrose puts it perfectly when he says, "No one heals himself by wounding another." Women in need do not need to be coerced into disposing of a precious human life in order to live theirs to the fullest. They need Christ's love and compassion, which is shown so openly at crisis pregnancy centers. These centers offer a variety of services to women. According to Students for Life of America, pregnancy center services range from parenting classes, baby supplies, and other financial aid. along with ultrasounds and on-site prenatal exams. Crisis pregnancy centers are spread across the United States, and their services are often at no cost. In a 2017 report from the Charlotte Lozier Institute, in that year alone, centers across America provided almost 2 million women with free services, and in addition to providing over 24,000 clients with post-abortive services such as counseling, support, and direction to professionals. The resources that are provided by unplanned pregnancy centers embrace Christ's love and compassion for the most vulnerable and in-need areas of our society, helping mothers to know that abortion is not their only option, and that if they have had an abortion, that they are not unwanted or unloved. The end to the tragedy of abortion is near, though we cannot give up yet. In the words of St. Teresa of Avila, Christ has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. So may we take this as a call to action, aiming to educate others on the truth of abortion and help children and mothers alike. When we take these steps towards creating a culture of life, we can change hearts and minds on this issue, because another 60 million lives will not be taken on my watch. Thank you.
At this time, the judges are going to tally the scores. I want to commend the judges because this was very, very difficult. And so what we're going to do is we're going to announce the second place winner at this time, and that is Haley Bordelon. And our first place winner is Christine Doré.
Thank you.
And we really need to give a hand to everybody else because this was just so very difficult, and you did a great job. And all of you came with very unique perspectives, and the depth that each of you have shown tonight gives us much hope for the future. Thank you.